celebrated in the United States on August 26 to commemorate the 1920 adoption of the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which prohibits the states and federal governments from denying the right to vote from citizens of the United States on the basis of sex. It was first celebrated in 1972 and designated by Congress in 1973. While we celebrate this achievement, we cannot ignore that all women or people groups in general did not gain the right to vote. The work of the African American women's suffrage movement reminds us that the struggle for the vote did not end with the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920, because it didn't address the racism that prevented African Americans in Southern states from voting regardless of sex. Women like Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, Diane Nash continue to fight for voting rights for all, culminating in the passage of the Voting Rights of 1965. I'm Keisha Morant Williams. I am a board member of the YWCA, where our mission is to eliminate racism and empower women. Tonight, we will continue our work of listening and reflecting as we discuss voting, equity, and inclusion, and continued examples of racial injustice. Most recently, the shooting of Jacob Blake, whose father was quoted as stating that his son is currently paralyzed from waist down after being shot from police officers. A special thanks to the Lancaster County Community Foundation for supporting this event and enabling us to host all of our participants tonight. We've convened this panel to reach for a greater shared understanding of what is happening in our country. We have three wonderful panelists with different backgrounds and perspectives who are very generously agreed to share their expertise with us and help us reflect. Thank you all. First, we have our Mayor, Deneen Sirachi, who previously served on City Council as Finance Committee Chair before being elected to the office of Mayor in 2017. Equity is rooted in each of the city's strategic priorities, including strong neighborhoods, safe streets, secure incomes, and sound government. In addition to being mayor, Deneen is a mom to a rising freshman at McCaskey and a proud School District of Lancaster parent. We also have with us Tracy A. Jones. He is a nonprofit NGO strategist who partners with social entrepreneurs, grassroots leaders, executives, and organizations to leverage the intersections within sports to advance communities. Tracy holds a dual bachelor's degree in accounting and sports management from Widener University and a master's in nonprofit NGO leadership from the School of Social Policy and Practice from the University of Pennsylvania. We also have with us Tanae Darby. Tanae is a community activist in the southeast section of Lancaster City who focuses on Black and Latino affairs. Her involvement in several committees and boards ensures that these people groups are appropriately represented. According to Tanae, my goal is not to be the voice for the people, but bring the voices of the people, bringing our issues to the surface and also having a part in the reciprocal revolve. As we proceed, you are invited to ask questions or share comments using the chat functions. My colleague Adam is skillfully managing these systems, and we will have time for some of these questions later. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And Mayor, we'll begin with you. The first question for you is, in some of our previous Community Now sessions, we've discussed the demonstrations and work that's taking place on the national and county levels. Mayor, please speak to some of the efforts taking place, or perhaps that have already taken place in Lancaster City related to these topics, and then help us also unpack some of the tangible steps that have been taken to improve equity and inclusion. I know that's a mouthful, so if you need me to repeat some of that, I'd be happy to.
Thank you, Dr. Morant. And it's really an honor to be here and to be. I think that the YW is so well positioned for this moment on this day, Women's Equality Day, and as we are collectively working to eliminate racism. And so I really appreciate your service to their board and thank for having this opportunity. Just to take a step back to the end of May, or just the month of May, because there were a number of really high profile loss of life Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and then of course George Floyd. And we started the top of the hour tonight with remarking about the hospitalization and paralysis of Jacob Blake. And I want to tell you that I thought that I had, the fire in my belly and the motivation to be doing this work when I became mayor. We were doing a number of things related to, a lot of things within the police bureau and other places within the organizations. But I will say that after the week of protests and talking with so many people from our community here in the city of Lancaster, as well as across the county, and even some who were not from even Lancaster County, but who came to the city that week, that fire turned into, I don't know, I'm not quite sure I have the words to describe it, but it became very amplified. And so on June 5th, and then again on August 11th, I released a number of commitments to racial equity. And I'm just gonna highlight a few of them because you can visit the website of the City of Lancaster, pa.com, and spend some time there. But, we responded in terms of policy changes, in terms of banning chokeholds and strangleholds and things that were part of the 8 Can't Wait. We also, on June 5th, talked about the hiring of a second police social worker and making that position available to support our community in the evening hours when there are fewer services that are available. And we also underscored some of the commitments that we're making to address some of the more pernicious, less connected to perhaps, but very much contributing to equity and environmental racism that have to do with lead and the elimination of lead poisoning in our city by really focusing on specific census tracts south of King Street, excuse me. And subsequent to that, on August 11th, I provided a report to the City Council to talk about how we were taking additional steps. And I describe this as writing a book, and this is a chapter, but it is a book that will continue to be written. And we, last night, I shared with council the work that we're doing around diversity, equity, inclusion within and the planning process that we are undertaking that will touch every department and all of our staff here in the city of Lancaster. But as in another conversation that I had yesterday with an African-American gentleman who reminded me and said, Mayor, all of the things that you're doing are good in terms of the systems change within the city. And we need you to be using your bully pulpit to be bringing other institutions that are primarily white-led to these tables and having these conversations, and in particular around economic equality. And, I carry that, and I am energized to continue to push forward those conversations. And these kinds of forums really help elevate the need for those kinds of conversations. And then if I could just conclude by saying that this is a messy process and it's hard conversations. And I think that our ability as a community to continue to have conversations and listen really deeply is going to be what makes and sets apart Lancaster and its future and its ability to achieve the kind of equity and inclusion that we are striving for.
Thank you. Okay. So Tracy, you do some impressive and targeted work related to athletes. Why do you do what you do? And what are some of your intended outcomes of these efforts?
Again, it's an honor to be on this panel with the three of you women. And thank you again, Stacy, because I know you're watching as well, for putting this together on as we commemorate the 100th anniversary of Women Equality, but also are operating within August, which is Black Philanthropy Month. So it's definitely good to be a part of this conversation in this season. So what brought me to this work was the fact that I was a student athlete, and I just grew tired of seeing other student athletes overachieve in high school athletics only to underachieve in life. And what we were starting to see was that a lot of our athletes are treated like pawns in society. But the benefit of a pawn is if you move it to the other side of the board, it's the only piece on the chessboard that promotes. And so what our athletes were, they were being a part of the game, but they weren't truly using the game and leveraging the game to the best of their advantage. And so I created the T. Alexander Foundation in 2016 because it was something that I believe we could prepare athletes for what's next. That PA4WN, you drop 4, you have a pawn. And as a nonprofit, one of the things, and the reason why we sought the nonprofit designation is a lot of communities are centered around sports. When you think about Lancaster, it's 7.3 square miles, right? And if you go to any of the big meetings, they're like any other city. When it comes to sports, everyone's there. When it comes to normal change in our community, no one shows up. So leveraging the power of sports is something that I think we should do more of. And because so many people are interested in the outcomes of the games and are pretty much couch coaches, why not turn those couch coaches into community activists? And so that's what we've really been trying to do over the past 4 years of just taking the game of sports. We have similarities of what goes on in sports and society, and really just trying to push individuals to reimagine how we engage. And it's been a great 4-year journey. And it all started, and I look at it now, and the reason why I brought it Women Equality Day, in 2006, my grandmother gave me this, right? And so like, you'll see her note to me. But really reading this book has shaped since going to undergrad in 2006 to 9, where it talks about, William Roden talks about this conveyor belt, where athletic gold is mined from Black communities. And because it's mined from Black communities, it's controlled by white institutions. And white institutions benefit from the power of sports. And so many of our Black youth and Black communities are centered in sports, and we're really not tapping into the other side of it. So when we talk about economic and social justice, we can have those same conversations in sports when you know everyone is there. I think what's happening right now as we're recording this is the NBA boycotting the playoffs right now. And it's historic because they're doing it in a bubble. They said they were going to go into the bubble to amplify social justice issues, and that's just what they're doing. And so it's amazing when we can use and leverage the power of sports, and that's what we try to do in all things.
Excellent.
I'd love for you to hold that book up again, Tracy, so I can catch the title. Thank you.
I'll bring a copy by the office. I got a couple extra copies. I'll bring a copy by the office for you.
That'd be awesome.
Excellent. Good. All right. And so tonight we'd like to bring you into the conversation now. As we all know, you're deeply involved in the Southeast. And so as a Lancaster City native who's deeply committed to the city, and as we just mentioned, more specifically, the Southeast, and you're absolutely committed to sort of demanding a seat at the table. You're committed to representation and voice and all of these different things. What do you find to be the biggest hurdle, but also the biggest reward when advocating for your community?
That's a great question. And thank you for YWCA for putting this together. And I'm very humbled to be a part of this great panel. My greatest hurdle, I think, with anyone in the Southeast that, has stepped forth to try to bring forth the issues and have that seat at the table is trust. The Southeast residents have a huge issue of trust of anyone, especially in government or related to the government or anything. So, my biggest hurdle is to show them that, hey, I'm a resident here just like you. You know what I mean? I grew up on Green Street, Franklin Street, so I'm a lifelong Southeast resident, so I'm going to stand up for what you feel is right for our area, because there are, projects that want to occur in the Southeast that, that I want to make sure that I'm bringing all their voices to that table, not just my own, because I'm not the only person who lives here. And, some people are intimidated by powers that might be sitting at that table, might not feel they're articulate enough. I'm not one of those people, I'm going to bring their voices, bring it raw and bring it real. And I think that's the biggest hurdle, is the trust. And I think that slowly I'm gaining that trust within the Southeast, for them to know that I'm that reliable source that they can come to with this information, with these complaints, and know that it's going to be directed outward to the appropriate people that it should go to. Sometimes it's a big task to take on, because unlike, some of the officials who are elected for these positions, I'm not. But I find it to be very important for them to have that person that they trust and that advocate for them, because for so long, the Southeast feels like they're forgotten. But to go to your second question, my biggest reward is that gratification of when there is that resolution to their problem. Just like yesterday, 2 days ago, I contacted the mayor's office with a problem a Southeast resident had. Mm-hmm. And she immediately got on the issue, and they came out right away and fixed the problem. And that person was just so elated, to have had that when they've had this issue, might have addressed it with somebody else and they didn't get any resolution, so that's my biggest, is the gratification of the residents feeling that they have that reliable person, that there are people out there who are listening to them and that do care, even if it's something as minor as a sign.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And so something that, like, in each of your responses, something that came up consistently was relationships, relationship building, that relationships matter, over and over again in all of the answers that you all shared. And in my, sort of 9-to-5 life, I'm a communication professor, and relational communications is that, my wheelhouse. That's the area that really matters to me. And so I was really impressed and appreciate that each of you were able to bring that into your answer. So whoever can sort of jump in and answer this one for me. When thinking through that, how do you work? And Tanae, you sort of addressed that in there, and I feel like each of you have sort of hit on this, but if we could sort of directly go towards it. How do you work to build relationships with community members so that that trust can be established, so that folks can say that I believe in the voting process, because someone is listening to me, or that folks say I can, go through the proper steps for this because I am heard, or, that I can do more than X, Y, and Z because I see that I do have options. So talk to me a little bit about that. And whoever wants to jump in is fine with this one, but I just found that really interesting that all of you did address relationships in some way.
I'll jump in since I was the last one to talk. I think you really have to make yourself relatable to that resident, or the residents, especially in my area. Like when we had the African American Festival and the party that I'm affiliated with, we had a table up there and we were doing voter registrations. When I walked around to the people, I was like, look, come on, you got to register to vote. We got to, we have to do this. We have to, get these people in office that we want, so you have to make it seem like you care as much about their lives as you care about your own, and I also think in the Southeast, especially within the African American community, is family ties. A lot of people, know my grandparents and know they were upstanding people, and, my uncle, my mom. So they know that those characteristics are within my family. And so there's that trust also within me. And then when I demonstrate that trust with the things that I follow through on, whether it's educating, I'm a big educator on my Facebook posts, any bit of information that I think is pertinent for them to know, I put it out there. I share everything that I'm privy to know, that I feel that they should know. So, just knowing that I have their best interests and I don't keep information just to myself, that I give it and I share it with all of them because I want them to be as prosperous, as I am.
So I'll follow up to Tanae, because one of the hurdles that Tanae mentioned was about trust. And, that's inherent in what we're talking about in terms of building relationships, especially when we're having hard conversations, right? I mean, in order for us to move forward, I feel we have to have some level of trust. And now look at me, I'm sitting here at 120 North Duke Street. I represent a government that has not historically fostered equity and has used power and has harmed this community. We can see it with urban renewal and the efforts of that, as well as just the legacy systemic racism that we're constantly pushing up against. So for me, it's harder because, unlike Tanae, I don't have the deep history family relationships in our neighborhoods. I'm a relative newcomer to the city of Lancaster. But I heard loud and clear, and I mentioned this when we were talking before the show started, is that when I was campaigning, knocking on doors, I heard two things. One, that folks didn't know how to connect with the city and they were living with problems that they didn't need to live with. And two, they didn't trust that even if they called, that anybody would bother to respond to them. And so for me, that's like a really big deal because it speaks to integrity. Like if I say something, I'm going to do it. And if I'm not able to do it, I'm going to tell you like why. Or for example, this is a small matter, but it was significant for the folks who lived on Hershey Avenue. That stretch of roadway was supposed to be paved in 2018, and it didn't get done until 2019. And so somebody asked me, like, you said it was going to get done in 2018 and it didn't happen. And I was like, you're right, it didn't happen. And I can tell you why. And I can also tell you that you're right that I made this commitment and I wasn't able to fulfill it. And I think we just have to acknowledge, I feel it, integrity is one of the core values that we are pushing out and really wanting to elevate as part of the city. Respect, teamwork, integrity, and quality. Those are the four core values of the city of Lancaster. And for me, I see a question in the Q&A just about, well, how are you going to measure the progress of these initiatives? And this is all well and good. Well, I'm going to be reporting on them on a regular basis because this is the heart of what I'm here to do. And I believe this is why I was elected in the first place. So it's doing what you say you're going to do in terms of building relationships so that trust can be established. Sitting and listening and having conversation with people and being accessible. I'm very accessible, 291-4701, call my office. And also, just being straight. Like, I'm the mayor and people think I can do a lot of things that I can't do. And so that's disappointing sometimes to me, even often to me. But this is part of just our opportunity to engage.
And I would just add on to that, being a military brat, and fortunate to kind of move around early in my life, I would just say, the trust, the integrity, but really the respect, right? And one of the things as grassroots organizers and just participants at times, one of the things that I always encourage some of my mentees or even myself is first ask yourself, were you asked to come, Because I think a lot of times people are inviting themselves into situations that they shouldn't be in. And so I often have to check my own savior complex, where I get into a situation and I say, was I even invited here? Or should I even be in this position? And then once I'm in that position, the next step is asking, am I listening? But am I also respecting the perspective of the messenger? Because again, it goes back to, if I'm entering this space, 9 times out of 10, I truly don't know that lived experience, and I could be doing more harm than good, which leads to my last one, where I always ask myself before entering in any partnership, any mentor to mentee relationship, what good will my harm cause? And when reflecting on that, there's certain things where you say, yes, I can provide an immediate help, but did I just kind of create more dependency that will constantly have to be fed or constantly have to be watered, that eventually is going to be in a situation where I break trust, like Tanae mentioned, and I'm no longer in the community. And I think a lot of times with our grassroots, we go in with the savior complex without even really asking, were we invited, listening, or asking ourselves, is our good going to cause more harm to this community?
Thank you all so much for those answers.
That's good.
We have one more round of prepared questions, and then I see that questions in the chat are filling up. So we're going to go through this, and then we'll begin to answer questions from the folks who are logged on. And so for this next round, Mayor, we'll go back to you again. The question is, when we look at all of what's going on, in just our society in general, how do we link this back to the importance of voting? How do we motivate community members to recognize the importance of voting at all levels in all elections?
So as somebody who's run in 2 local elections, it has been disheartening at the low level of voter turnout for local elections. And I think that we're all getting really clear about the role that local officials play in matters related to public safety. And I think about the ways in which democracy, this idea that we are electing individuals that reflect our values, and that we are focused a lot at the federal level and still don't have, a voter turnout that's, consistently even above 80–85% nationwide. And so, and then by the time it gets to the off-year elections for school board or for local officials like city council, or even positions like the one that I currently hold, that drop-off is so precipitous. So I don't know of a way to connect any closer to government than me and city council members. I mean, we are neighbors. We send our children to the same schools. We celebrate the highs and lows of our community together. And when, the trash doesn't get picked up, the streets don't get paved, when there are real, significant issues between police and community, this it's me that's showing up. So I say all that just to contextualize this moment that we're in to voting, because it does matter a lot who sits in the White House. Absolutely, absolutely. But it also matters who sits in the halls of Congress in Washington, D.C., as well as in our state house, as well as in our city halls across America. And in our school boards, because they are setting policy and direction as well. I mean, Dr. Williams, we were talking about your role as a school board member. I mean, these are important positions, and and a lot of it for me comes down to leadership. And I think that we have to merge our commitment to issues and what we care about, and also who has the leadership capabilities to actually realize those changes, because it's not enough to stand up and say that you are for or against something. You have to have the skills and abilities to be able to make that change and lead. And that is something that I think we don't evaluate carefully enough during our election process. And I would just say that, you know, I grew up in a house where voting was absolutely essential. Like, there was no question. I voted in my first presidential election the year that I turned 18. And I think part of that was just my family's immigrant experience and not having had the right to vote in the same way, or having that vote suppressed. And so we all have our family story about that, or a story in which voting just wasn't part, that people just did believe that it didn't matter. And I think that that narrative about your vote not mattering has been sold to the people who can have the power. And I liken it to predatory lending, where we're selling something to somebody who is going to be taken advantage of. So we sell the story that your vote doesn't count, because it's a lot better if you, quote unquote, you people don't vote, meaning poor people, people of color, people whose English is not their first language, all of that narrative. And I want to fight that with every ounce of my being.
Okay, good. And so, Tracy, following up with that, sort of people buying into this narrative that their vote doesn't matter, and in some instances, we most certainly see examples of younger generations really getting behind voting and so on and so forth. But we also see the other end. We see where there are some who are they just don't believe that this is for them. And so, talk to us a little bit about how your work exposes young people to their other options, like options in life, options related to, you know, decision making, all those different things.
Yeah, so again, we go back to that pawn concept. We really try to help our athletes understand that in a grand scheme of things, they're on the chessboard, which is athletics, for a short period of time. But when they're finished competition, hopefully they're able to leverage those networks and those experiences to launch and promote into other realms of life. And so one of the, you know, going back to that thing about narratives, is we talk a lot about not trying to be a part of the 1%, but understanding you're part of the 99%. And it's not to dispel any dreams of going pro, but the 1% of the individuals that do go to be pros, they still end up becoming a part of the 99% once their competition is done. And so we really try to help them understand that you're always going to be a human. You're always going to be a member of society. And what are you contributing to society? I think our biggest struggle is we often, as elders or community activists, we shoot down a dream, or we say, we don't need you to do X, Y, Z. However, we want you to pursue careers in STEM or politics. But when we have those that are speaking about these careers, we're bringing in athletes. And so I think a lot of it comes from us and repurposing our messaging around who are we putting in front of our youth, and who are we propping up to our youth in regards to messages that they can receive. I will give credit where credit's due, that the NBA and WNBA have been great in amplifying some of the messages. But at the end of the day, we're still feeding our kids and our youth and our communities regurgitated half-truths. And I think this is an important time in our society where we challenge everything and also do some exploration for self. And our work is about that. Our first invitation is an invitation to learn. It's an invitation to education. And so, Mayor, I joked about providing you a book, but that's what we do, actually. You know, we have several copies of different, you know, pieces of literature, because we don't want you to think in our way. We really want you to explore what it means for you to be you. And when we kind of force a message to anyone, we strip them of that opportunity of fully exploring what certain literature or what certain messages mean to them. And it also creates a lot of mass confusion in the greater good of our community. And I think it's important, as all organizations, we really kind of just stay focused on, for our athletes, how are we making sure that you're being the best human when you're done competition?
Thank you. And then Sine, if you, as a follow-up, one of the hats you wear is the Minority Inspector of Elections. And so talk to us about that role, why you felt it was important to serve, and how do you motivate or educate residents surrounding the importance of voting?
Well, first I want to explain what a minority inspector is, because I'm big on education. The minority inspector is basically kind of the person right underneath the judge of elections. We do a lot of signing of the same paperwork that the judge does. We actually swear the judge in. And the biggest role of it, though, is at the end of the evening, the minority inspector is the person who takes the tallied ballots, everything that the election office gets. We also take a copy of that home as well in a sealed envelope in case there would ever be any discrepancies that would happen. There's also another party who also has these tallied votes and on all the counts and everything on them. And we are required to keep those for a year in our possession. So that's a very huge civic duty to take on, to make sure that you have those. I probably have years of them hanging around here somewhere. But it was important for me to get involved, and I became involved when Obama ran for presidency. You know, as a person of color, we all just wanted to get involved, you know, make sure that he got elected. So I was just like, how can I do my part? You know, what can I do? And that's when I got involved in working at the election polls. So, you know, for me, it's very important to educate people about voting, you know, because obviously we're talking about women today as far as commemorating, you know, the anniversary, but I'm a twofold, and so are you, Keisha. You know, we're women and then we're Black women, you know, so that was a barrier, twofold barrier for us to you know, to overcome. So I just think, you know, in educating people about the importance of voting, you know, for me, it's getting people to learn those branches of government and the importance of when to come out to vote. And, you know, even most people come out during the general elections, but they don't even understand how important the primary is, you know, because like I tell people, if you would have came out in the primaries, that person wouldn't even have the option to be even a candidate, you know, to be in the general election. So, you know, just putting that information out there and knowing what parts of government do what, because I noticed also during all the protesting that there was a lot of misplaced blame, especially on the mayor, of things that she had no control over whatsoever, you know. And I mean, I will say, you know, for my JPM, Red Tornado education, that, you know, I had civics and American government, you know what I mean? So I was very versed on, you know, voting and things like that, because I got A's in both of those classes. So, you know, and it's just educating everyone on the process. And, you know, my thing is, if we said to you, well, you don't vote, so we're going to take that right away from you, then everybody would want it. You know, it's like we, you know, we want we want it, and then we don't want it, and then we don't use it, you know. So, but your votes do matter, you know what I mean? In any election, you know, I saw where there was somebody down in Georgia, and an African-American woman who asked for a recount and literally won by one vote, you know what I mean? So, I mean, one vote can make a difference, you know. So I just think that, you know, for me, the involvement of getting involved in the election process, of even the candidates, of understanding that, you know, brings a full picture of being able to fully educate people about what's going on. When it's election time, I get inboxed so much about where do I vote at, what's my polling place, and you know what? And I take that on every inbox and I'm like, here's the information, you know what I mean? So I do try to be, you know, that bridge of information that people need, and that they can rely on. You know, I think that's very important for them to have those avenues to be able to come to.
Okay. Thank you so much, all of you.
And, you know, just to follow up on that, if I may, Dr. Williams, you know, I think that one of the things that's really heartening right now, which, you know, it's like also dystopian, that we're having this conversation about removing mailboxes and voting, like mail sorting machines, and that is really motivating people in a way to understand how voter suppression works, and that this is like the modern day version. I have a friend who lives in the Mississippi Delta, and his name is Sanford, and he posted, actually I guess his uncle posted about, you know, his grandmother having to answer questions about the Mississippi Constitution in order to be able to vote. And that's only a generation ago. And that was particularly for African Americans living in a state that has just tremendously painful history as it relates to slavery. And so as we elevate these kinds of things, and the post office, for as terrible that all of that was, it really did elevate this conversation about voter suppression. And I hope that it mobilized more people to register to vote and to really make sure that their voice was going to be heard at the polls, that they weren't just registering to vote, but they were actually going to vote and making a plan to do that, either through a mail-in ballot or going to the polls on election day.
All right, so we have lots of questions in the chat box. Mayor, I'm sure as you can imagine, many are for you. So I'm going to scroll back to the top, and I am going to do my very best to work through many of these. And Adam, I might need your help going back and forth with some of them to make sure that I don't miss things. And so the first one, this one is a bit more general. So how can the police appropriately respond to a mental health crisis without mental health training? What's being done to ensure that people who are struggling with active mental health systems will be able to interact with a trained individual instead of an officer that does not have training and shows up fully armed, which can automatically escalate the situation?
Mm-hmm. You know, this was a conversation that I was just actually having with the Chief Berkeheiser today about an instance in which we were called to a house by another law enforcement agency for a man who was having a mental health crisis and was suicidal. And it ended very peacefully with an officer spending an hour talking through a door to this individual to de-escalate that situation. And then he was transported, you know, taken to a facility for care. Another, you know, a couple weeks ago, Prince Street was closed because we had an individual, this was a Saturday morning, and I was downtown, and there was an individual at the top of the Lancaster parking garage. And it was, again, police that shut down the street and that was on the scene to help that individual. These kinds of mental health crises happen every day, and not necessarily every day here in the city of Lancaster, but every day across the country. And police are responding to them because in many places, they're the only available assistance in a moment of crisis. And so they do have mental health training. And I think we should also be asking questions like we are about, is this the best that we can do? Because right now, when you call 911 for this kind of crisis, and let's say it is, after hours or over the weekend, there is not really another entity that can show up to help you but for a police officer. And that's part of the conversation about how are we providing these emergency services. In the city of Lancaster, we have 80,000 police calls that we receive on an annual basis. That's 80,000 times people are calling for some kind of service. And so how do we help redirect some of those calls? And then also, how can we prevent some of those calls from happening in the first place? And that's part of why, we've committed to, bringing on a second social worker within the police bureau, but also a housing social worker to be able to help address some of the other issues that are underlying. And this is a much broader conversation, because part of our challenge also is that the city is, the way that our government is set up, the county is the recipient of all of the mental health and drug and alcohol and social service funding, and not the city. But we need to interrelate with those two systems, and that right now does not exist through the 911 call center.
I know the question was not directed at the panel, but I think it goes back to what we were just discussing regarding the importance of local elections. I think that point that you just highlighted is missed on a lot in regards to the city is a sub-recipient of the county. And
we're not even a recipient, Tracy. We don't get any money from the county.
And that's even worse. And so what I think this conversation, what we really have to start centering around is, as a grassroots organizer and NGO strategist, how are we being stewards of our resources? Because as I entered the nonprofit space, as nonprofits, we have a tendency to operate like banks when our service needs are more like hospitals. And we need to operate in these schedules where we can assist with some of these problems or these occurrences in our communities, and really being mindful that we may not need to dump most of our overhead in a 9-to-5 schedule, but maybe backload some of that overhead from a social service organization to our nights and weekends where we know most of the calls are occurring. And then secondly, as citizens, we have to do a better job of seeing the humanity in each other and using the law enforcement as our last line and not our first line. Because I'm a transplant up here to Lancaster, and I know as a Black man, 6'3", 250 pounds walking around, when I first came up here, if I was double parked or if I was walking around the city in the wrong way, I was approached because someone said I looked suspicious, right? Or I was doing something with headphones on. And again, that gets back to us being human, really seeing the humanity in each other and asking someone, if you see them, if you're comfortable, is there something I can help you with? Rather than calling all the resources, because when our initial response to trouble is we're calling and saying, hey, we need this is really going on. And that's how sometimes it's being met with. I can't speak to all situations, but specifically because we've had situations with some of our student athletes that are enduring a mental health incident or episode, and because the other people were brought into the situation, it escalated it, rather than us just really sitting there, making sure that this individual had the right resources and de-escalating amongst each other in the community.
I can't underscore that enough, Tracy. It is something that, and also one of the things that happens is, like, we'll get a 911 call and somebody will call and say, this just happened on Dolphin Street. Police show up and they're like, yo, like, why all the police response? Well, we got a call that there was somebody down here with a knife, that was threatening someone. And they're like, there's nobody down here with a knife. There's a couple guys having a fight. One went home. It's all good. Like, that kind of thing. And also another thing is like, people have the, you know, instead of like going to their neighbor and saying, hey, can you turn down the music? You know, I got kids in bed. Can we agree to just turn it down like by 9:30, 10 o'clock? They don't even have that conversation. Like we aren't able to build neighborhood relationships for a lot of different reasons. And I know that's not going to be the answer in every situation, but if we could start by just doing the things that you're suggesting, Tracy, and seeing the humanity in one another, and starting with that conversation before calling 911 or even the non-emergency number.
I wanted to kind of add to that my brother does work in the mental health field, and he had told me a story recently where, you know, a patient came after him and assaulted him up and down with racial slurs. Mm. And I think that, and, you know, because of my brother's stature, everyone was surprised that it never turned into a physical situation, because that's not my brother's intent. So I really think it goes about intent. First of all, we need to stop calling them law enforcement. We need to go back to protect and serve, because that word law enforcement, you know, in most people's minds is already, you know, resistance. You know what I mean? You're here to protect and serve. So let's do that first. You know what I mean? Like I said, you know, my brother has had a lot of de-escalation training because he worked at IU13 as well. You know what I mean? So they were flabbergasted at how well he handled the situation. And when he walked away from it, people were concerned about, you know, what was said to him. But when me and my brother spoke, like, I'm on the same wavelength as him, that person has mental health issues. Why am I going to take what they say personal? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to take that personal. That's just like if somebody ended up calling me the N-word, I'm just going to laugh at them, because if that's what you had to resort to saying it to me, I already won. You know what I mean? So I think, you know, in learning, these officers need to learn. You want us to be calm in hostile situations. Why don't you try the same thing and know that it's not so much personal either? You know what I mean? And I think, you know, if they would just, again, like both Tracy said it first, and then Mayor said, the humanity. You know what I mean? How would you treat this person if they were your family member? You know, when I worked in a dementia unit, that's how I thought about, you know, those patients. If this was my grandmother, you know what I mean? How would I interact with her? How would I, instead of arguing with them, you know what I mean? And I just want to say that there was a case that happened in front of my house that I recorded on my Ring video, that was a mental health issue, or it was a drug issue. And I want to say Officer Luciano handled it wonderfully. I saw how they handcuffed the gentleman because he was flailing his hands and everything for his own protection. And once the ambulance arrived, they took the handcuffs off and they left it to the EMS workers. And I literally went outside and I told them that you've handled that very well, because I work in the drug and alcohol field. So I knew it was kind of more drug related, you know what I mean? But just, I saw Officer Luciano then talk to this man in Spanish, which then calmed him down, because there was that relatableness, you know what I mean, between them. So, you know what I mean? Again, that humanity, making the situation relatable. Just think about if that was your family member, you know what I mean? Like I said, protect and serve, not law enforcement.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions in the chat. Thank you all to the participants who are submitting. So I'm going to do my best to sort of try to merge at least some of them together so we can get through a few. One that I want to ask links to policy perspectives. And so it says, what can be done from a policy perspective about making sure as Lancaster City grows and prospers, that all people have the same opportunity to be a part of that growth? Mentoring young people for 20 years, I've noticed a trend that qualified Black and Brown people pursue opportunities in other cities because of the lack of opportunities at home in Lancaster.
I can start with what we're doing in the city of Lancaster, and I think it goes to some of the comments that were shared with me yesterday, which is we got to do it here at the City of Lancaster, but then I also need to elevate the need for this, to address hiring practices in other organizations as well. And so when I was on City Council, we banned the box, which was a first step in really considering all applicants regardless of whether or not that they had a felony conviction, and appropriately checking records depending on what the job was, and contextualizing that in the course of a person's life. We are doing a life cycle analysis right now from our recruiting practices, the way we write job descriptions, the way that we do interviewing, the way that we onboard and hire and promote within the City of Lancaster, that has been long overdue, because we've been talking a lot about creating a workforce that reflects the diversity that is our city, and we don't have that right now. And that is a goal. And so for me, the metric with that is how well are we moving toward a goal in which 50% of our workforce is women, and that 40 to 60% are people who are of color who are working here in the City of Lancaster. And that means that we need to sometimes spend a longer time recruiting and making sure that we have candidates of color who are included in the final round of interviews in terms of the final selection, and really helping to come up with ways to address implicit bias that can show up in interviewing processes, and help coach and support our hiring managers in doing those kinds of things. So that's what we're working on. It's definitely the beginning of a journey for us here at in the city, in terms of city government, but it's also something that I'm using as an opportunity to talk to other organizations about what they can do. So in addition to asking, how much is the lowest paid employee that works for you, also asking questions about how are you ensuring that you are recruiting and excelling as an organization, because you are recruiting and hiring for diversity in all areas, but particularly around race and ethnicity.
I would add that as far as, because someone had inquired to me about becoming a candidate for city council, but they had a criminal record. So, some of those policies as far as being candidates also need to be looked at, because I don't think anybody should be held prisoner to their past, especially when there's been a lengthy amount of time that may have passed. I think those things also need to be looked at, because I think that's kind of discouraging as well to some of the younger people. Might be, something that they did, when they were 18, that was foolish, and later on, might want to become a candidate for some type of office. I don't think that should be something that should be held against them as well.
All right, and so this one links to, I'm trying to merge a few different areas together. Some folks are asking about the use of force. And so one of the questions goes to, how soon will Lancaster residents be granted public access to use of force records without having to file a right to know request? And when can we expect access to the police department's internal disciplinary records?
So the first part of that is governed by Act 22, which is a state law that governs the release of certain information through body camera footage and so on. So that's part of the equation. We will be releasing in the coming weeks a summary going back over the last 2 years of use of force within the city, which obviously is the largest police department and one of 27 police departments across the county. So we're going to be making that information public as well. That will also include information about discipline that has been disciplinary efforts that have been made as it relates to officers. So for example, termination, suspensions, retraining, last chance agreements, which basically are agreements with the union that if there's another instance in which there is misconduct in some way, that they are will be terminated without the benefit of an arbiter.
Mm-hmm.
So because I'm big on education, this Act 22 at the state level, who would be the candidates that would govern that decision? Can we educate our people on that?
Yeah, so yay, thank you, Tanae. I love that you're, so that would be Representative Sturla and Senator Martin. So we have one state representative in the city of Lancaster. His name is P. Michael Sturla. His offices are in King Street. And we have one state senator, and that is Senator Scott Martin, and his offices are on Chestnut Street in the post office building.
Or Janet Diaz, who is the Democratic candidate running against Scott Martin.
Yes, but you were talking about who's elected.
Right, exactly. But I'm saying if we're talking about, you know, the voting coming up, they know that that's one of the things that she would, you know, have to do. That's what I'm trying to educate.
And Representative Sturla is running unopposed for his seat. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you for jumping in today and giving us that additional information. And so this one kind of goes back to building relationships. And so it says, in regards to building relationships with voters, there's a lot of concern about specific police officers' relationships with the community. What is your take on Officer Jonathan Capel and the current protests and petitions that have been removed from the police bureau?
Yeah, and so I'm happy to answer this question, and I do recognize and understand that that the issues that are being raised related to Officer Capel revolve around personal relationships and his child. So members of City Council have been briefed in executive session regarding these matters, and I also understand that these allegations have been investigated by the Lancaster City Bureau of Police and by multiple other police jurisdictions, including the Pennsylvania Attorney General's Civil Rights Enforcement Section. And based on the results of those investigations, and this is the part that, you know, as my job of mayor, there's no legal justification for terminating or taking other action against Officer Capel.
All right. This question asks, do you think low voter turnout among young people is in part because candidates are not doing a good enough job reflecting our values?
I would say just because I have a young son, again, it goes to education. Like I said, I had American government and civics where I know he did not. And I had found this rap video that spoke about voting. I mean, the title says don't, but it's contradictory to what's actually in the video. And I actually sent it to my son, and I had him listen to it, even though my son votes and everything because of me, obviously. But I sent it to him to send to his friends. And when his friends listened to it, they were floored. And he literally got 20 of his friends to vote, register to vote, off of watching that simple rap video.
Okay, I want to know what it is, Tanae.
I mean, that explains voting like so eloquently, you know what I mean? And it's, you know, an easy, understandable terminology. And like I said, since it's a rap song, you know, you'll tend to listen to it as a nice beat and everything. But I think some of that has to do with education. And I do think that also the candidates, as you said, for instance, in the Southeast, even though there's 4 quadrants in Lancaster, unfortunately, not all 4 quadrants are represented on City Council. And so, you know, that poses an issue because then we feel like there's nobody really relatable for us on that council. And I know when I did some canvassing for Judge Richardson when she was running for judge, and I went around to people, they literally said to me, they were just coming to vote for her. So again, that goes to, if you have the right candidates that the people believe in, people will come to vote, even if it's just for that one person. And that's very important and imperative in the Southeast, where I said that relatableness, that trust, you know, she's homegrown, lives in the Southeast, you know, so it was a no-brainer for them to come and vote for her. So I think, again, it boils down to education and also having that candidate that the people trust, and even, you know, the young people trust, you know, just like the young gentleman who went to McCaskey, I can't think of his name, but he ran for mayor. You know, he was really great on, you know, his stances on everything. I just think he needed a couple more years and he'd probably get in there, but he made a lot of young people look, you know, and pay attention. So I think it's about, like I said, again, relationships and relatableness to those candidates and that trust.
And that candidate is Tony Dastra, and today's his birthday.
Oh, happy birthday.
I'll just add to that from the community side. I think as nonprofit organizations, we have to do a better job of addressing politics. I think so much of our identities as organizations has been tied to the politics or religious beliefs of donors, that we kind of shield our youth from hearing messages that they need to hear. I think it's very unique to Lancaster because we operate in 4 other markets in larger cities where politics and religion are at the forefront, specifically here within this city, because most of the times nonprofits are competing for the same donors. They're almost suppressed to a certain extent. And that, unfortunately, our kids just take, or our young adults take the information that they learned in school, which they were never really able to apply it in life. And then they just wander through the process, hoping that they have a Judge Richards that they can get behind, because that's, you know, who actually came out and related to their story. However, I think it is very important for us over the next 60 days to really engage the youth where they are, in the spaces that they are, the different digital mediums that they're in, to have these conversations, because so often we shy away from it and we don't really have young adults engaging in the process until it comes time to take out a loan for a car, buy a house, or start a family. And by that time, most families are being started in the 24 or 25 range. They've already missed 3 presidential elections, right? And I mean presidential elections because they're voting every 2 years, right? And so between 18 and 17, or 18 and 25, that's 7 years. And so we have to keep, I think the messaging is all elections are presidential. I think we give people a scapegoat when we say, oh, the 4-year one is the presidential one. We say all presidential elections.
Yeah, it's Tracy, that reminds me of, like, I use the language off cycle or off year elections. There's no off year, right? It's like you need to vote every year. Yep.
And that in that rap song that I'm talking about, he literally says that we came and voted for Obama, but 2 years later we needed to come back and vote for Congress. You know what I mean? So he makes them, he makes you understand how important that middle term election really is, more important, because he makes them that legislative branch, which makes the laws of how much you get on your food stamp card. I mean, he went there, but he made it relatable to people, you know what I mean? For them to truly understand how important it is to vote for this legislative branch of people.
And Tanae, if you could find that by chance,
I know where it is,
and share it, because someone asked in the chat, you know, like, do you have the link to that? And I feel like I saw the video before, but I know I probably.
I mean, it's on YouTube. His name is Yellow Pain.
It's here. Yeah, I think Adam posted it.
Oh, he did post it.
Yeah, Yellow Pain, my vote don't count.
Yes,
okay.
That's it.
All right, so good, and it's in there. All right, so some folks have gone back, like you all were having a conversation about mental health, and someone poses a question and they say, just because police are able to respond to mental health crisis doesn't mean that they should. Are they the best people to handle a mental health crisis?
I think that that is absolutely the right question, and I agree that they may not be the best people to handle a mental health crisis in every situation. Absolutely. And I would also say that we need to work to build systems within the human services realm of our government, which is at the county level, to be able to have someone to be able to respond other than police. And not just here in the city of Lancaster, but across the county.
And then sort of a follow-up to that one, it says that the 2020 adopted budget for the city shows that that the Bureau of Police have 195 full-time employees to service a population of nearly 60,000. But there's only a proposed increase of 1 social worker to service the same population. So, and then they have a question mark after it.
Yeah.
So
that 195 include non-uniformed staff. So we have 145 budgeted police officers that we have line items in the budget for, and we currently have, I believe, around 133. So there's a number of vacancies there currently. I agree that we need to evaluate the amount of what we need in terms of social work, and we're in the process of doing an evaluation of the social work that has been done over the last about 10-12 months since we brought our first social worker on. This is something that that the police department requested last year, or actually I believe it was my first year in office. In 2018, they actually, it was Captain Stebbins who made a proposal to hire the first police social worker. And it took us some time to hire that person. She actually grew up on South Ann Street, speaking of the Southeast neighborhood, and is bilingual and joined our department about 10, 11 months ago. And so it has taken her some time to figure out how to do this in the police department with the social service organizations and build relationships and so on. And we're learning, and we are adding this additional capacity. And yes, it certainly may be that we need to add more. And I would say that at this point, we are continuing to learn and figure out more and better ways to meet the needs of folks who are calling for services. So another example is we get a lot of calls around parking. Well, we have non-uniformed parking patrol service aides that are going out. And those are individuals who are, again, not showing up with a gun to address issues around parking. So we have to move in the direction of, our police recognize that with the reduction of social services over the last decade, as budgets have been cut, they have been tasked with responding to more and more calls that are not policing calls. And there is a desire within the police bureau to figure this out. And so we just have to do that. And it is causing us to bump into these other systems that which we don't have control over. And that we need to have these broader conversations about, because even a social worker in and of themselves alone is not going to respond to some of the mental health calls. So we have to develop protocols for when are we having someone go out by themselves, or when they're going out with a uniformed police officer, what is the role of the police officer in those situations, and so on. So it's not as simple as I would like it to be.
I would think too that, there are social workers, just like there are domestic violence counselors, just like there are drug and alcohol counselors, you know what I mean? Because I don't think like police either should be responding to, an opioid overdose, and things like that. So, I mean, those might be avenues to also look into, not just social workers, but let's specify, this domestic relations, this one for drug and alcohol and things like that. I mean, even people to, even deal with youth is a whole different, category and in itself as well.
Yes, and a lot of those folks exist. They're just not on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And so we got to figure out how to do that, because the need exists. And also, how are we working upstream? That's a big question that I keep asking. How do we reduce the number of crises that we're responding to, that police are being asked to respond to in the first place? And that goes to the heart of what we're talking about tonight.
We're going to try to get through 2 more questions, and then I'll give you all time to give your final thoughts. And so I'm kind of following the same narrative linked to police officers. The chief recently stated in a report to the city council that the use of pepper spray on protesters was done by the book, but that the book needs to be rewritten. Will you commit to banning pepper spray and all forms of tear gas? Why do you think that sprays, which are not allowed to be used in global conflicts, should be able to be used on Lancaster residents?
Yes, so let me just be clear. The city of Lancaster does not use tear gas and does not even have tear gas. So period, end of story. Pepper spray is something that, I have a canister of that was given to me by a neighbor. I'm like, I don't know what to do with this, but it was something that he bought at Dick's Sporting Goods. So the difference between pepper spray and tear gas are very different. And let me just be clear, I want to say it again. The city of Lancaster does not have tear gas. Absolutely no way. And so that I want to make very clear. The other thing around pepper spray, and this is a conversation that is being raised and we can have for sure, is that if that is removed as
Non-lethal.
Yes, it's no hands are being placed on somebody. It's less lethal than other things. And so I think we have to have that conversation in terms of the use of force continuum. And I would also just encourage folks to go to the City of Lancaster website and read the revised use of force policies, which we changed in 2018. And that was a really big deal for us, because that will reduce the utilization of the use of a taser. And that is a more lethal force, obviously, than pepper spray. So these are the conversations we need to have as a community, but absolutely no tear gas.
I think we also need to define, as far as police officers as well, what constitutes threat. You know what I mean? Because like I said, in the situation my brother posed to me at his work, the guy got in a stance ready to, knock my brother out, but my brother said he got in a stance, but he stood back from him. He didn't engage the person. So, until there is that ultimate imminent threat of them coming towards you, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's where the boundaries also need to be drawn, because I don't think anyone should be a police officer if you're scared of someone's skin color. If that in itself intimidates you, you should not be a police officer. Like, you just shouldn't.
Okay, and then the last question for this evening. Cuyahoga County in Ohio recently declared racism a public health crisis. Is this something Lancaster could or would consider to take a bold stance to address systemic racism?
So I think that's a question to the city, because I'm sitting in this seat right now, and I love that in terms of making a bold stance in terms of this being a public health crisis. And I'm actually wrote down Cuyahoga County, and I want to look at that. We need a bold stance, to be sure. And I need folks who are listening and all of us to demand that from other institutions as well. Because the only way that we can declare racism as a public health crisis is if we're addressing all aspects of our community: education, healthcare, lending, housing, all of it. And all of those things require more than just me.
I would just add to, if I may, sorry, Dr. Williams, just in regards to the racism being, labeled a public health crisis, I think it's important that we also look at racism and its impact across just Lancaster in itself. Especially we'd be remiss if, being on this platform with the YWCA and just we talk about eliminating racism, it's really, that's what we need. So regardless of how we label it, that's what we need in Lancaster, because again, I'm a transplant, and I think we go about, us as transplants, we go about trying to create change, but there's some strongholds in this community that have yet to speak out since May. There are some funders of these organizations and within the community that are still holding their privilege and access very, very close to their chest without letting go of that to advance our community as a whole. And so I think statements, we've seen enough of the statements. However, some of our larger organizations that are still, doing or funding the work need to actually put action towards it and release some of their privilege if we're going to truly eliminate racism or address racism. Because none of the actions that have occurred in the past 4 months say anything about liberating as opposed to more controlling.
Thank you. Thank you. And so to wrap up, panelists, what do you want to leave us with? What do you feel was left unsaid tonight? Is there sort of a final word, a final contribution that you all would like to share?
I would like to share. First of all, I want to tell people to get involved, especially the election polls. The election office is looking for poll workers. They are paid positions. The only thing that is a very long day, though, I will say that, but it's not really physically taxing on you or anything. I want to encourage people to get out and vote. I am immunocompromised myself. I have, 2 autoimmune conditions, but best believe if I have to put on a hazmat suit, I'm going to vote. It's that imperative. And, and especially as a person of color, a woman, someone died fighting for this right. You know what I mean? We have to sometimes carry that momentum with us. I think about when I watched the movie with 42, and I remember the first time he ran out in the field. Do you know the pressure that he must have felt and the weight that he was carrying of the Black community on his shoulders when he ran out on that field? You know what I mean? And sometimes we have to remember the people that came before us carried a very heavy weight, you know what I mean, that afforded us some of the things that we are able to do today that they wish they could have done. So I'm just going to encourage people, please get out to vote. If you don't know who to vote for, what they do, please contact me. I will try to help you in any way possible in understanding the process. But please just get out and vote.
Anyone else?
So I'll jump in and just say that there are several important dates for everyone to know, which is one of them is October 19th. That is the last day to vote for the general election. And you can pick up a voter registration form the voter registrar's office at the County of Lancaster. And more efficient is probably checking out votespa.com, where you can register and find information about voting as well. If you are a recipient of a mail-in ballot, please make sure you submit your mail-in ballot, complete it as soon as possible, and submit it early. Best not to procrastinate and miss the deadline. You'd hate to go through the trouble of getting a mail-in ballot and then forgetting to complete it and then sending it and then it not being counted because it was received after November 3rd. So make sure if you are going to do a mail-in ballot that you send that first and as soon as you possibly can. Election day polls are open from 7 to 8 a.m. It is not too early to plan your day in terms of work commitments, childcare, and so on. Make a plan for how you are going to get to the polls on November 3rd if you are not using mail-in ballot. And as Tanae pointed out, if you've got questions, there's lots of places, League of Women Voters, PA Votes, you know, hit us up on Facebook. We can help answer questions and direct as much as possible. Really appreciate everybody getting out to vote and to really making sure that your voice is heard. This is they you know, we thought the last election was the most important election of our lifetimes, and well, the stakes are just getting higher.
And I wanted to point out too, all 435 House seats are up for re-election in November. So you can make a serious change, you know what I mean? And there have been people that have beat 35-year incumbents. So it's possible. It is really possible, but it's only possible unless you get out there and vote.
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you again for allowing me to be on this panel as we commemorate again Women Equality Day for the 100-year anniversary. Just think about it. It took a year for the actual bill to be ratified and signed into law. And I think as we think about the struggle and continual fight for equity and rights for women throughout our country, it's important that we keep them centered in most of our conversations and what we're doing throughout our everyday work. No woman's experience is monolithic, and I think it's as we have these conversations about Black Lives Matter, and really, you know, again on this platform with the Y, is just thinking about how we're uplifting and advancing those women who do the work countlessly in our communities and really put us or individuals like myself as a Black man in positions to feel protected and supported. So I think it's very important that even though we talk about some of the larger issues in our society, we think about the humanity and the strength of the Black woman in our communities that have done the work and continue to do the work to little to no avail. So I think I definitely, when I got this invite, I was honored because it means so much to support women as much as women have supported individuals like myself.
All right. And so we want to thank again all of our panelists, and we also want to thank all of our community members for joining in with us tonight. All of the Community Now discussions are posted on our website, so feel free to watch the recording of this one or any of the other ones that have happened up until this point. And we just ask that you please continue to walk alongside us as the Y continues to engage in these essential conversations. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Right.